This is purely a journalistic point of view. Nothing more has been said in this video other than that of which has been reported by various media sources and backed up with sources seen at the end of this video.
Extreme Championship Wrestling, the little promotion that could, was all ready to enter the big time with a pay-per-view show said to air in March 1997. ECW had grown thanks to it pushing the envelope, giving fans a violent and racy alternative to the family-friendly World Championship Wrestling and World Wrestling Federation. Just when ECW was ready to take things to the next level, an in-ring incident went terribly wrong, leading to a bloody injury of a minor, with some claiming it led to the cancellation of the promotion's first pay-per-view. The debacle would become known as the Mass Transit Incident, an event that rocked Extreme Championship Wrestling and threatened criminal and civil prosecution for wrestler New Jack, a man who never shied away from controversy. Much has been said about the incident, but what really happened and who was responsible? Join us as Behind the Titantron examines the Mass Transit Incident. Paul Heyman's Extreme Championship Wrestling was built on the idea of being an alternative to mainstream promotions, World Championship Wrestling and the World Wrestling Federation. ECW provided fans with violent matches, scantily clad sexy women, and storylines aimed at an adult audience. Traditional fans tired of the cartoonish characters in both the WWF and WCW found ECW to be more in line with the wrestling they grew up with, except this promotion was extreme. Like any form of alternative entertainment, ECW had its share of critics. Its heavy use of blood, violence against women, and liberal use of profanity turned some people off. People expecting to tune in and see Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling were in for a surprise. However, as Paul Heyman proudly said, ECW wasn't for everyone. The people who watched ECW loved it, and Heyman thought there was a much larger audience waiting to be tapped. ECW's audience continued to grow, and the company had a syndicated television show. The problem was the promotion needed a steady, reliable source of income, and so far hadn't found it. ECW enjoyed healthy crowds in small venues, but moving to larger venues posed a risk if fans didn't fill them up. Heyman looked to pay-per-view as a way to bring the fans in while minimizing financial risk. It seemed like a routine card on November 23, 1996. The team of Axel Rotten and Devon Dudley were scheduled to face the Gangsters, aka New Jack and Mustafa Saeed. Unfortunately, Rotten didn't make it to the arena due to a travel problem, forcing Heyman to find a substitute. A babyface young man named Eric Kulas substituted for Axel Rotten and worked alongside Devon Dudley in the match. During the said match, he was cut open by opponent New Jack and began bleeding heavily. The match was stopped and Kulas was stretchered out. Following the match, local police sought New Jack, attempting to charge him with felony assault. New Jack was criminally charged and Kulas filed a civil lawsuit against New Jack and ECW. The Mass Transit Incident has led to much speculation, but what really happened? Here are the events pieced together based on interviews with the people that were there when it happened. There are conflicting accounts of how Kulas got involved in the match. One is that he approached ECW officials before the card, claiming he was a 22-year-old who worked a couple matches on the independent circuit and trained under legend Killer Kowalski. By most accounts, Kulas' father supported his son's story, as did Tiny the Terrible, a midget wrestler who accompanied Eric. Kulas then changed into a bus driver uniform and prepared for the match. He was told he had to bleed during the match, but he'd never cut himself before. Reportedly, Kulas asked wrestler New Jack if he'd cut him and New Jack agreed. Heyman gave Kulas a shot, but Kulas' backstage behavior reportedly soured the wrestlers. On the Forever Hardcore documentary, New Jack and the Blue Meanie discuss how Kulas told the wrestlers what spots he wanted to do. Since Kulas was a rookie, his requests were seen out of line. Kulas' behavior offended many people backstage when the wrestling etiquette stated that he should have just shut up and listened to the veterans. When asking for color in the match, New Jack was more than happy to oblige and cut deep into Kulas, leading to a bloodbath. Depending on what account you read, New Jack used a surgical scalpel, a box cutter, or a knife to cut Kulas. In the Forever Hardcore documentary, New Jack claims Kulas didn't say how much he wanted to be cut, so New Jack pretty much went to town. New Jack mentioned Kulas was cut down to the skull. Seeing the situation, New Jack hightailed it out of the arena, knowing the police were angered at what just happened. After the melee, New Jack reportedly grabbed the microphone and said, "I don't care if this motherfucker dies." In his appearance on Forever Hardcore, New Jack was asked if he had any regrets. New Jack said no, and welcome to the business. Another story is that Kulas' forehead was so difficult to cut open, and it took New Jack 3 tries before he was successful. While some have tried to downplay the injury as your typical blade job where sweat mixes in and makes things look a little bit more bloody, other accounts don't support this. Devon Dudley said New Jack basically beat him up pretty bad. It was the scariest thing I've ever seen in the ring. In the book Hardcore History, ECW's behind-the-scenes worker Don Label recalls the incident. "I was frightened watching it because it was well planned out. What New Jack and Mustafa did to him was criminal. It really was. I was just inches away from him, and I swear, in all my years in wrestling, I never saw blood shooting out like that." Label would go to the back and told Heyman, "You've got to do something. They're going to close the show." He just looked at me and said, "So?" By all accounts, Kulas appeared to be bleeding heavily, and EMTs reportedly ran out of pads to soak up the blood. Kulas was stretchered out as EMTs struggled to stop the bleeding. He even reportedly gave the fans a finger as he was taken out, supposedly because he wanted to get over as a heel. Based on the evidence, it seems clear that Kulas suffered a serious injury. Questions arise as whose fault was it? Did New Jack go too far, or did Paul Heyman mishandle the situation? ECW boss Paul Heyman was known for taking liberties with the truth and his Rasputin-like ability to mesmerize workers into following his bidding even if it went against their best interests. As ECW owner, how much did Paul Heyman really know about Eric Kulas? What if anything should we believe about Heyman's account, whether it's his claim about Kulas or whether it's his claim that the dirt sheet sabotaged his company's pay-per-view? According to the WWE book The Rise and Fall of ECW, Paul Heyman asked for an identification from the 5'10", 350-pound Kulas and gave an ID that turned out to be fake. Midget wrestler Tiny the Terrible reportedly confirmed Kulas' story. Heyman is quoted as saying, "Well, he had a phony resume and he was illegally working some shows in Rhode Island, but the referee never knew about it. This kid came in with a midget named Tiny the Terrible, a well-known midget. I asked Tiny, 'You know this guy?' Tiny said, 'Yeah, he's one of Kowalski's top students and has been wrestling for a couple of years. Sure, I will vouch for him.' So I put him out there with Devon against the gangsters." When it comes to the cut made on Kulas, Heyman said New Jack went too far and he cut the kid too deep and gave him a good gash across the forehead, nothing that hasn't been seen before in wrestling and nothing that some guys haven't done themselves, to be honest. Ironically, Killer Kowalski, the man Kulas and Tiny the Terrible named as Kulas' trainer, was in the arena that night. Kowalski could have easily have disputed Kulas' account. ECW's pay-per-view Barely Legal, planned for 1997, was cancelled. There are conflicting stories whether the mass transit incident led to its cancellation, with Heyman blaming the dirt sheet Pro Wrestling Torch for the show's cancellation. The Torch's editor Wade Keller claims Viewer's Choice, one of the pay-per-view providers, had already decided not to air the show, citing concerns about the promotion's content. It appears the mass transit incident was just the last straw for the other pay-per-view provider, Request TV, and they decided not to air the show. Paul Heyman would then move heaven and earth to get his pay-per-view back on the air, and on April 13, 1997, Barely Legal, ECW's first pay-per-view show, aired, drawing a 0.2 buy rate. In the WWE's The Rise and Fall of ECW documentary, Paul Heyman talks of how the pay-per-view was essential to make ECW financially solvent, noting he was competing with giants like WCW and the WWF. Taz comments on that same documentary that the pay-per-view was necessary for ECW to get national exposure. Pay-per-view did not prove to be the magic elixir ECW needed. ECW would continue running pay-per-views and even reached a deal with national cable television station TNN to air ECW. However, when TNN courted the WWE from USA Network, ECW was dropped. This was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, and the promotion folded in 2001. Eric Kulas' claim that he'd been assaulted and traumatized fell apart once it got to trial. According to the book Sex, Lies and Headlocks, claiming long-term emotional and physical damage, Kulas pressed criminal assault charges against Young. But the wrestler was cleared in 1999 when a 6-person jury viewed a tape of Kulas pressing together his lips and puffing out his cheeks, an action to make the blood flow more freely, and decided that Kulas was a willing participant. Eric Kulas filed a civil lawsuit against ECW, however he died in 2002 following complications from a gastric bypass surgery. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed episode 5 of Behind the Titantron. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more content, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.